Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are all naturally impatient. We would all like to skip the intermediate stages to arrive instantly at the final phases. At first, it's a thought that strikes me as untrue, something I've merely construed. After all, we say that the lessons are learned in the doing, and the joy is in the journey, and we have many other sayings that are equally as corny. And yet, when I sit with my friends and we talk of our goals, I'm struck by what lies at the core. We all want to change now. That weight that is bearing down on us needs to be gone now. That sin that raises its ugly head and throws us to the ground needs to be gone now. I hear the voices behind it all, and they scream, I am imperfect. I am a defect, a guilty convict, fit to be nothing more than a reject. And I don't want to be that. I need to be changed. Now. And then I hear a seductive whisper in my ear, and it says, imagine what you could be like if only. If only you worked out, imagine what your body would be like. If only you worked harder, imagine what your reputation would be. If only you prayed harder, imagine what your spiritual life would be like. If only you're more beautiful, stronger, smarter, better. If only. And then I turn my eyes to Christ and I see before me a new reality. As I look to the proud tree, in it I see that it is the law of all progress that you cannot achieve success so rapidly. And instead, it may take a very, very long time. We are all growing. But only God can say what that new spirit forming gradually inside of you will be. So give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you and that you will be so much more than the proud tree. So accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete.
Hey everybody, my name is Pete and I'm one of the lead pastors here at Creekside, and we're in week 3 of a series that we're calling In the Waiting. And it's all about waiting. And the first week I talked about how kind of we're in this culture that is sort of anti-waiting, like treats waiting as a bad thing. And I want to explore that a little bit more today because I think that this culture is actually changing the way that we experience waiting. And what I mean by that is this. I had this experience the other day. I had this realization the other day when I was watching Sunday afternoon football. And for me and for many preachers, Sunday afternoon football is God's gift to the preacher. Like you preach your guts out Sunday morning, and then you get home and God has this buffet of games for you. And if you don't know, the NFL, they kind of slate their games in an interesting way. They don't just play one game at a time. In the 1 o'clock slot on Sunday afternoon, there are 8 games, sometimes more, but usually around 8 games being played all at one time. Now, it used to be that you would just have to pick which game you want to watch, or you would just get, whatever game your antenna could get, like that would be the game that you're watching. For me, I grew up near Detroit, and so it would always be the Lions, and you get to watch the Lions every Sunday. But now, with the internet, and with more and more subscription channel and the idea of streaming happening, there is a product that will change your life called NFL Red Zone. And NFL Red Zone does this, and I recently got this, and I'm experiencing what it does to me, but what it does is it gives you all of the games all at once with no commercials, and it just shows you the most interesting thing that's happening in the 8 games. And so it's called Red Zone because any team that is in the red zone, meaning they're about to score points, you see that game. Which means you see every touchdown, you see every field goal, you see every interception, every kick return, anything of interest. You're just constantly seeing like, look at this game, oh, this is an amazing thing that happened. Okay, now we're gonna go to another game. Let's show you this thing. Oh, look at this amazing touchdown. Okay, now something that just happened over here, we gotta show you this. Sometimes there's like 8 boxes, they call it the octo box. Sometimes there's 8 games up at once, but usually it's just one game at a time, but no commercials, constant action. This is me Sunday at 1:00, and it's just like you're just putting this direct line into my vein of football, just like pump football into me. 8 games at once. But then the 4:00 hour hits, and in the 4:00 hour, there's only 3 games on. And what I've noticed is that shift from the 1:00 Octobox into the 4:00 3 games is a real letdown. Like there's a real bit of like, oh, only 3 games? Man, like no one scored a touchdown in 2 minutes. This is kind of boring. And it's almost like hard to get through. Like it's almost not enough to be watching 3 professional football games all at one time. And then there's a night game. There's a night game that starts at 8:30. So you put the kids to bed in between games. I think like the NFL has it perfectly worked out. 4:00 games end, put the kids to bed, then the 8:30 game. But there's only one of those. And what I've realized is that beginning the day at the 1:00 with 8 games and ending it with 1 game, by the time there's 1 game on, I'm like, this isn't enough. This is not enough stimulation. This is like, how many touchdowns are gonna be scored? Like 4, 5, 6 in 1 game. This is too boring, like too much time in between. Like I'm bored. And what I've realized is that this product, NFL Red Zone, has made it so that I am unable to watch just 1 game of football. Like it's taught me, it's conditioned me for a reality that doesn't really exist. It's conditioned me for a reality of like, no, you should always be getting all like 8 games, 10 games, 20 games. You should be always at like a touchdown every couple minutes. It's conditioned me for that when that's not actually real life. And so now I can no longer watch 1 game of football. I think that this is like a microcosm of what our culture's doing to us. Our culture that says we need to have everything now. No waiting. Waiting is bad. We should invent more and more technology to erase waiting. It would be good if we didn't have to wait. The culture that says that is creating products like Red Zone. And what that's doing to us is making us unfit for actual reality. It's preparing us for a reality that doesn't actually exist. And so when we come face to face with reality, which includes waiting, like normal life includes waiting. When we come face to face with things like suffering and longing and disappointment and unmet expectations, all of these are normal parts of life. All of these are just normal parts of every day. But when we come face to face with those after being conditioned by a culture that says that like we can get rid of all those things, they do a number on us. Like I don't know about you, but I've found that they tend to like knock me out. Like one thing, one bit of waiting, one bit of uncertainty, one bit of suffering, instead of just saying like, yeah, that's part of life. And I guess in that area of my life right now, I'm waiting. I guess in that area of my life right now, there's a bit of suffering. I guess in that area of my life right now, there's a bit of uncertainty. Instead of just being able to say, yeah, that's part of life. I can have that part of my life. That part of my life tends to like turn into like a tidal wave and just consume all of my life. I don't know if you've had this happen to you. Maybe you've had it happen to you before. Maybe you've had it happen to you during this season of COVID. That like COVID happened, and a lot of things changed, and there's a lot that it has caused to be different. And yet sometimes what I feel, and maybe you felt this during COVID, is that it just makes me want to write everything off. Like, oh, I have to wait for that thing. I have to wait for this thing's different. You know what? Let's just scrap the whole year. Let's just 2020, let's just write it off. Like this one thing happened in the one area of your life, and it just had this like tidal wave expanding effect. It became the only thing that you could see. Maybe it's COVID, maybe it's something else. You were waiting to become a parent. You were waiting for the right one so that you could be married. You were waiting for like a business opportunity. You're waiting for the right job, the right calling. You're waiting for some new responsibility. You're waiting for God to do something in your life. You have some sort of suffering, you have some sort of longing, and instead of it just being like, yeah, that's there, that's happening there, it just became the only thing that you could see. And it got bigger and bigger, and it took over all of your life. If you've experienced that before, then what I want to do is recover a word for us today. I want to recover this word. I want to reclaim this word, because I believe if we can recover this word, that it will actually strengthen us and help us get through what may be a long, dark, cold winter that is coming. And so the word is this. The word in the Greek is this, hupomone. The word is hupomone. That's the Greek word. And now I want to look at how this word gets used in the New Testament. And then we're going to look at a picture of what it looks like for people that display this. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how we can be people that embody this hupomone. But here's some definitions of hupomone. Here's the long one. The characteristic of someone who is not swerved from their deliberate purpose and loyalty to faith and piety by even the greatest trials and sufferings. So they have this direction, this purpose to their life, this loyalty to Jesus, and yet they are not swerved from that by even the greatest trials or suffering. So this is a longer definition. Now let me give you two ways that it gets translated most in the New Testament. And it gets translated as patient endurance and perseverance. Patient endurance and perseverance. My own personal definition, I like to just say it this way, that we just keep going. That we just keep going. And over throughout the New Testament, we find this word, and it gets spoken over, and it gets used as a word to describe the followers of Jesus. That we should be people of patient endurance and perseverance. All throughout his letters, the Apostle Paul, as he writes to churches to encourage them, he uses this word. As he writes a letter to the Thessalonians in Thessalonica, he says this in the opening and kind of like the welcome part of the letter. And you see this all throughout parts of his letters where he's doing this welcoming. He says this, "We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ." Endurance, that's that word hupomone. He's saying, like, we remember. And one of the things that we remember all these things. Like, you know some of these words, right? You know the words faith. You know the words love. And he uses this other one. We remember and we're inspired by your endurance. You'll find this. If you go look it up, like do a little Google search, you can find that Paul's often saying this to the churches. He's like, may you have this. We're inspired that you have this. Another place where we see this word used is in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, we get these images of Jesus speaking to the church at the time. And he speaks to 7 of the different churches at the time. And to 2 of these churches, he says that he's seen their hupomone. And in the church in Thyatira, he says this, "I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance." That's the word again, hupomone. And so I give you these examples just to put forward the idea that we, as followers of Jesus, are supposed to be people of perseverance. We're supposed to be people marked by this patient endurance. We're supposed to have it. We're supposed to embody it. This is something that we want to have. Now I want to look at, well, what does that mean? Because it's one thing to say we're supposed to have it and embody it, but what does it mean to have it? What does it look like to have it? And to do that, I'm going to go to the book of Hebrews, and I want to look at chapters 11 and 12, but I want to start in chapter 12. I want to start at the ending of this passage and look at the thing that he's encouraging us to do, which is to have this perseverance. So I'm going to look at the end of the passage first, then we're going to go back and look at how he gets there. So he says this, "Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." So he's encouraging us, may you have hupomone. May you run with perseverance the race marked out for you. Now, this is the end of the passage. How does he get there? What's the images that he gives us so that he can end with, now that I've said all this, let me say this, run the race with perseverance. The way that he gets there is that he talks about faith. And so in the beginning of chapter 11, he says this, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for." So he begins this argument that's going to end with, so run the race with perseverance, by talking about faith. He's talking about trust. He's talking about this confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. It's this, I've glimpsed something and now I'm going to trust and hope that there's more coming behind it. It's this trust that we have in God, that there's this plan unfolding. And so he says, there's faith. And he says, this faith is what the ancients were commended for. It's faith that the ancients were commended for. Remember, he's going to build a case. He's building towards this idea of, so now let us run this race with perseverance. But he begins by saying, let me remind you of what faith in action looks like. Let me remind you. And so he says this, and then he begins to give us all of these reminders, these summary statements about the patriarchs or the ancients who were commended for their faith, those who have gone before us in the faith. And so he begins to give summary statements about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Sarah and Rahab and Gideon and the prophets and the martyrs, and gives us all of these little flashes. And as I read through this week, because I was trying to understand, like, what's the argument that's being made, there's a couple things that I noticed. The first one was this, that twice in this passage, he says something like this: these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. They all had this amazing faith, and yet none of them received or got to see or experience the fulfillment of what had been promised them. Now, what does that mean? It means that all of these people that are being commended for their faith lived with a longing, lived waiting for something to happen, lived under some sort of suffering. And this gets said twice, once in verse 39 and once in verse 13. So there's a bit of a like, hey, I say it once, I'm going to say it again at the end. Like, I don't want you to miss this idea that these people lived with this amazing faith, and yet their faith, as it was played out, had to have this perseverance to it, because they were always waiting for something. They got to see little glimpses of God doing things here and there, but deep down, the big promise, they were waiting, and none of them got to see what had been promised. The other thing that I noticed as I read through this, as I thought about this idea that they were all waiting, is that, yeah, they were all waiting for something, and yet they were all still moving. They were all still going about their lives and doing amazing things, even though they had this one area, they had this big like pillar in their life where they're like, yeah, that thing, like I'm waiting for God to do that big thing, and yet they still were doing stuff. They're still living their lives. Let me just read what he says about Abraham. It says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. That's great. What a great picture of faith that is. Like, God calls Abraham, and Abraham's like, where are we going? He's like, I'll tell you on the road. Then it says this, by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. I love this picture of Abraham. Like, yeah, Abraham was a man who was called to do great things by God, and yet he lived with this longing that he never got to see. And what was his life like? Well, he lived in tents. And was it just him that lived in tents? No, like his son lived in tents and his grandson lived in tents, and they all did this, like they lived their lives with this big, like just imagine like a big pillar in their lives. We're like we're waiting for that to happen. Like we're hoping that God's going to do that. And they lived with this idea of like one day we're going to move from tents and there's going to be this beautiful city that we get to move into. And yet none of them actually got to see it. What I want you to see, and if you go in your life groups later on, you're going to look at more of the stories in this passage, but I want you to look and imagine these people's lives and realize that they had this one area of waiting and longing, and yet they still did amazing things with their faith because they were people of perseverance. This is what it means to be people of perseverance. It means that you keep going. You don't let one thing stop your whole life. And I wonder if that's what happens to us sometimes. If there's one thing that we want this thing to happen, God. We want this thing to get removed. We want this thing to get resolved. And we let that one thing stop everything. We let that one thing turn into like a write-off of the whole day, a write-off of the whole week, a write-off of the whole year, a write-off of our whole lives until God fixes that one thing. And I wonder if this picture of this hall of faith, as it's often called, is meant to spur us on to say, like, you can have an area of longing and waiting and still be moving and living an amazing life of faith. And this is the point that I think that the writer wants to make. So after giving all of these examples of faith, he then summarizes it by saying this in chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, since we have all of these people gathered around us and their amazing faith stories, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, which is saying like get rid of, like you can just throw off all the stuff that's impeding you, that's slowing you down, that's making you want to give up. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. There's a psalm that I want to pull one verse out of, which is sometimes dangerous to do if you're dealing with the Bible, just to pull a verse out. But I love the way that it captures this idea that I'm trying to get across to you today. And the writer says this: wait for the Lord and keep his way. I love these two lines: wait for the Lord and keep his way. There's this sort of like I'm waiting for God. I'm waiting for him to do something over here. And yet while I wait, what will I also do? I'll keep his way. It's like on one hand, I'm going to wait. I'm going to put my trust in him. I'm going to trust that he will fulfill this thing. I have hope that he's going to fulfill this thing, that he's going to remove this thing, that this suffering will eventually end. I'm waiting on him for that. But in the meantime, I'm not going to let that whole thing just take over my whole life. I'm also going to keep his way. I'm also going to do the things that I know I should be doing. I'm going to continue to serve. I'm going to continue to love. I'm not going to let this one thing shut down my whole life. And so if you felt that, maybe these are words for you today, just to say this, that I will wait for the Lord, but I'll also keep his way. I summarize it in my own words this way. I will keep going. I will keep going. I will not let one area of disappointment, one area of suffering, one area where I'm waiting, I will not let that one area stall out my whole life. I still have all of these other roles to play. I am still a father. I'm still a husband. I still have a job. I still have relationships. I still have a workplace. So I have all of these other things that are going on in my life. And I'm not going to let one area where I'm waiting stall out my whole life. I will keep going. Now, how? How do you do all this? That's what hupomone is. We want to be people of perseverance. We want to be people who keep going. How do I do that? Here's a simple way. Here's my own wording of this. Just ask this question. Well, what can I do? Well, what can you do? There's one area where you can't do anything about it. It ain't moving. Nothing's happening there. God, you've talked to God about it. He's like, nah, that's going to stay there for a little while. Well, what can I do? I want to talk about two lists. The first list is like the foundational stuff, and the second list is like secondary stuff. But let me go through these things of how you could answer this question. Well, what can I do? First list is this. You can worship God, you can pray to him, and you can give thanks. You know what the first thing that Job does when his whole life gets destroyed in the book of Job? Like at the end of chapter 1, Job's whole life has been destroyed. You know what he does? He doesn't just go, oh man, my whole life's been destroyed. I guess I'll just write off today. It says that he falls to the ground and he worships. No matter what you're waiting on, no matter what suffering you're going through, you can still worship. You can worship. Try worshiping. See how it might reorient your spirit. See how it might change. See how it might help you take your focus off of the one area that's not moving, of the one area that you're frustrated with, and see if it helps you reorient yourself. Okay, God is God. I am not. I can trust in him. See if it helps build up your faith. You can always pray. And sometimes prayer, I heard it said this way, sometimes a great way to pray is just saying here, God, you take this. I can't carry this thing. I can't keep going through my whole day if I have to carry this weight that I'm carrying, this longing that I'm carrying. And so my prayer is just going to be, here, you take this. And my time of prayer is going to be God, I need to put this in your hands so that I can go and be a good father, so that I can go and do my job. And so maybe that's your prayer, is just you're just going to unload on the God who can handle you unloading on him. And then the last idea I have here is just gratitude, just giving thanks. And I think giving thanks can actually help widen our focus, because when there's one thing that we're waiting on, there's one area of our life where we're suffering, sometimes we get so focused on it. And because we're so focused on it, we end up writing off everything else. And yet gratitude can start to widen things. Like I'm so frustrated about this, but yeah, I'm really thankful for my kids, and for my wife, and for my health, and for my friends, and for my church, and there's so many other things. And suddenly there's one area that you're waiting on, but there's all these other beautiful things that are happening as part of your life. So this is kind of like the foundational things. Well, what can I do? You can do these things, and you should do these things, and I think that they'll help kind of waken up your spirit. But then here's another list of some things. You can get involved in community. Who are you talking to? Have you allowed this thing to shut you off from community? Are you involved in the church? Do you have people that are encouraging you? Do you have people that you're encouraging? You can ask who can I still serve? What can I be learning? There's so many amazing online modules and courses and classes that you can take, whether it be Christianity based and learning about your faith, or just learning about anything that you want to learn about. There's so many things, even during this time of COVID. You could be online learning from some amazing world-class teachers. Maybe you could spend this time learning. You could exercise. How many people have put on the COVID-19? You know what I mean? The COVID-19, the COVID-19. This pandemic hit, and suddenly all of us just said, well, you know what? Let's write off our health. we'll just won't pay attention to our bodies for a year because, everything's really hard and we just need to consume food at the end of the day. But maybe you could exercise. You could say, I'm going to spend this time actually preparing my body for whatever's coming next. I want to be healthy at the end of this. I can't control this area, but I can control my exercise, my physical health. Maybe you could get organized. Is your house a mess? Is your garage a mess? Is your life just feel like in disarray? You can block out some time and say, I want to organize my life. I can't control some things that are going on. I'm waiting for some things to open up, but I can still be organized. And maybe you just need to strategize. Because maybe this COVID season, or maybe whatever it is that you're waiting on, or whatever suffering you are enduring, has completely changed your life to the point where the goals that you used to have don't make sense anymore. And so what you need is new goals. But you never went through that little process. And so you've been living in this new season with the same goals. And you're trying to attain the same goals. You're trying to be the same person that you were in 2019, but you can't because 2020 is so different. And so maybe you just need to spend some time. I need to rethink my life and rethink what are attainable strategic goals for my life that actually make sense in 2020 and the season that we live in. So try that. Try just asking yourself, well, what can I do? And maybe by rooting yourself in worship and prayer and gratitude and focusing on some of these things, you'll find that one area where you were so focused on just gets put in its place. And you can be a person who has waiting and longing and yet is still persevering through it, who keeps moving forward. Now, to end today, I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise together. And to do that, I want to look at how this passage ends and add in the last verse that we've been ignoring so far. And if you know this passage, you've been like, why does he keep putting those ... there? Why doesn't he read the last part of this? So let me read you the last 3 verses that are chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. And then I'm going to tell you this exercise that we're going to do together. So after giving this great hall of faith, all of these brothers and sisters of the faith, the writer of Hebrews says this: Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I love how this section ends, because for us 21st century people, if we're given the command to persevere, we're like, okay, now give me some action steps. What do I need to do? I gave you some of those application pieces before, because that's what we need. And yet for the writer gives us a really simple instruction and says, I just want you to consider these things. We're like, how do we get through this? How do I get through the waiting? How do I overcome suffering and the longing that I have? How God? And the writer of Hebrews is like, just I tell you all these things, just consider these. Just ponder these things. Just ruminate on these things. And so that's what I want us to do to end today. It's to do what the writer says, is to just let's consider these things. And so I want to take those 3 verses and use them as painting a picture. And so I want to invite you to close your eyes. And let me paint the picture for you, and then we're going to pray, and I'll wrap up. So what's the first part of the picture? Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, just imagine yourself. Imagine yourself being surrounded by Abraham and Moses and Enoch and Abel and Gideon and Rahab and Sarah. Imagine, even all the people that he doesn't list, just David's there. Imagine you are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, and you're running a race. And the race is your life. And you're living your life. So imagine the area of your life right now where you are struggling. Imagine the mornings when you're struggling to get out of bed in the morning. Imagine the hurt that you feel that is just taking over your whole life and making you feel like, I just want to write off the whole year. Imagine whatever that thing is, that is your race. And as you look that thing in the face, there is a great cloud of witnesses that are surrounding you, and they are all cheering you on. They're saying, I did it. I ran the race when I was 90. I ran the race when I was 80. People tried to kill me. I kept running the race. People threw me in jail for 13 years. Joseph was in jail for 13 years. I kept running the race. I kept the faith. I kept trusting in God. You can do it too. Just consider that. That is, the writer of Hebrews says, that is the reality as you face the thing that is taking over all of your life. As you face that thing, the reality is that you are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. And then what's the second part that he says to do? Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. You have this great cloud that is cheering you on, and your eyes are on Jesus, the one who endured the cross for us. Fix your eyes on the beauty of his love. Oh, I just want to be like him. I just want to follow him. Just fix your eyes on him. But also realize that the same power that allowed him to endure the cross, the Spirit of God, is also within you right now. So put these things together. There's this crowd that is cheering you on. Your eyes are fixed on Jesus, who loves you and who you love. And there is this power being breathed into you, the Spirit of God. Now open your eyes. Just consider these things. The writer of Hebrews says, consider these things and you will be empowered to run the race with perseverance. May that be us today. Let me pray for you as I close. God, for anybody that feels defeated, for anybody who hears perseverance and thinks, oh, that's not for me, I pray that they would just do this simple thing of considering the cloud of witnesses, considering what Jesus has done for us, considering the power that is available to us. And God, may you lift them up. May you put their waiting, their longing, their suffering in its proper place, and may you help them to keep moving forward. Jesus, may the way that we live in a world that is full of disappointment and suffering be a light and a beacon to those around us. May they wonder what it is that we are putting our trust in that allows us to keep moving forward. Jesus, would you strengthen us today by your Spirit? We pray these things in your name. Amen. Grace and peace be with you.